Okay, welcome everybody. We were just sharing, check-in around what's been happening in our lives over the last couple of weeks, and the conversation kind of organized around this question of how do we face adversity? What shifts in us when we go from maybe excitement and enthusiasm to a setback? And then conversely, what happens in reverse when we're pulling ourselves out of adversity, or the situation changes and it becomes very positive and promising? And we were noticing, I think, different tendencies in us, like energetically or emotionally, intellectually, of how those shifts happen. And we could relate it to our own individual experience, but also how we're embedded in major shifts in society. You know, that I feel myself being pulled, for example, by the situation in India, because I was on the verge of a very large contract with a NGO in India, and the whole COVID situation has completely set them into despair. The head of the organization says, we all just want to give up. They've been working for 19 years and now they just want to give up. And so these patterns that shift, from extremes, really, because I also experience a lot of bursts of energy. And I know, like, for example, reading your white paper, there's a lot of energy and hope in that. So what happens? How do we navigate these shifts, these big shifts in both directions? So
how do we do life
how do we do life?
It's so interesting because there's just everything is in rapid transformation. Culture, economy, family, the relationship between the generations, the whole idea of education, what it means to travel, what it means to be, what is stability or safety now, and then, you know, in the midst of all this, we were just joking, saying this isn't the Anthropocene, this is the Liquicene. This is where we turn into liquid, and everything is becoming liquid. But the weird thing is the pervasiveness of the current kind of establishment and just the architecture of the day and the world around, that is, even in the midst of deep change, is perceivable as the core of stability, the pivot. And it's not the pivot anymore. And it's so clear to me that it's not the pivot. And yet, those pieces, like, you got to pay the taxes, you got to pay the rent, you got to think about your retirement, your kids got to get their degree, you got to, you know, and that stuff is so surreal at the same time. Is that really where the pivot is?
I guess I'll share something because this is so fresh for me. As y'all know, because we talked about it for a minute when we first got on, but just sitting in a major disappointment, personal disappointment. And it feels very raw, and I'm really happy to be here in community with all of you. I realized when I first got the news, I guess I'll just say that this house that my daughter and I really were counting on kind of fell through. So literally, like, our roots, kind of the roots we were counting on, didn't take, is how it feels. But I was crying so hard by myself, and I was reminded of how we need community to grieve. Like I could only, I felt myself. I was like, there are ways that I'm indulging here on my own by myself, and there are ways that I could actually go deeper if I was in community right now. So I came to this session happily. I already feel better, by the way. I ran into the house to get my charging cord, and I just shouted up to my daughter, I'm feeling better, because she keeps checking on me. But yeah, I don't know, Nora, what you say about the pivot, it just struck me very in this immediate way around this house where, you know, in the world that I live in already, things manifest and come through because of desire and for all these beautiful reasons and magic, and like I'm manifesting worlds over here. And so I thought that's what I was doing with this house. And I wrote this beautiful letter that was very honest and really talked about how important this house was for us and how perfect and how much we would care for it. And then to be outbid, you know, in a bidding war with a bunch of folks who can put down all cash, way over asking. We were all over asking, you know, and I just keep thinking they made a mistake. That's the feeling that I get. And I don't know enough about it, but just like, it didn't feel right to me on such a deep level that they're, and these poor sellers, I don't know anything about their decision-making process, but in my mind, there's a way they made the decision based on an old paradigm. And I was trying to bring forward this paradigm of like the house should go to the people the house should belong to next. And we're those people. And they didn't choose us. And so there must have been some kind of mistake. So that's what I'm sitting with, very much sitting in disappointment.
There's there's this thing with kids and with all of us humans, but there's this thing that kids need to learn. Like when they're little, on the one hand, they just need to be accommodated. Like I often talk about just laying out the red carpet and just saying a big welcome to them, like, welcome here on earth. We love you. We're so happy you're here. And for that first year, just doing a lot of that, like a lot of accommodating and helping them get used to being in these bodies. But at one point, if we don't help them adapt to givens, like things that just are, that cannot be changed, we end up stunting their development. And I find that insight has been one of the most helpful in my own parenting journey and working with parents is how do you navigate when a child hits what one psychologist, Gordon Neufeld, calls the wall of futility. Like what happens when you hit this wall that you want to punch down? And it could be you're not invited to a birthday party, or you didn't make it to the choir audition, or your grandma dies, or like some things happen, right? Life happens and it doesn't always go the way we want. And as a child, as a parent to a child, then we often want to just scramble and somehow make it work. And yet to understand the wisdom of working with that wall of futility, where the first expression is often a sense of being mad at it, like literally wanting to punch it down. I don't want my grandma to die, or I really wanted to go to that party, or how come I'm not invited, or why don't I get that cookie before supper, or you know, whatever the wall might be. Why are my parents getting divorced? I don't want that to happen. And the insight is that if the child stays in the cycle of mad, then over time it's like a hardening of heart that happens and a shutting down. And if you can find the sad under the mad, which is literally find the tears that are really there because it's a grieving process. It's like something's not going the way I want, and it elicits grief if we let it. That the amygdala then gets activated, and the tears have been analyzed, and they're actually they're quite toxic. Like, they're literally cleansing tears, the ones that happened through disappointment. And then if you keep following that journey, usually the child comes to the still point, which is, it's sort of like you've punched hard, then you've cried, you've surrendered, and at one point there's just in a way there's the giving up. Like, there's that stillness, that moment of stillness when there's nothing, there's no solution. There's literally sort of a depth of surrender. And then in neurobiology, they found that then the child, after that stillness, will often then initiate a workaround, and it will literally get the neocortex to grow and the prefrontal lobes. And I've seen that over and over with my daughters, from small to big disappointments, is first the frustration, then the grief, and then this stillness, and then afterwards these creative new passages forward that could not have been foreseen beforehand. And so as you're speaking, Sky, I was thinking, about 2 years ago, I probably had one of the biggest disappointments I've ever experienced in my life. And it's been amazing to me how many times that wall keeps coming up, and how many times I grieve, and then the wall pops up again, and then I grieve again. And so even the sense of timing around it, it's not like necessarily a one-shot done deal kind of thing. It can, if the wall's really big and the disappointment's huge, sometimes it's over and over. Especially in what really rang for me was when you said, I feel like it's a mistake. And by gosh, do I relate to that. Like, that disappointment 2 years ago, I felt like the universe was lining up, and it was way beyond personal desire. Like, something should have happened, and it didn't, because certain people made certain choices that I feel were not in alignment. And so the having to adapt to that has been the hardest for me. Like, adapting to things that I'd like, but maybe weren't that good for me in the end, I can totally manage that. But having to adapt to things that I feel like would make a really big, good difference for way more than myself, has been the hardest for me to swallow. So there's something in there about, I'll often kind of joke to my clients. I'll say, you can't dry run grief. Like, your cheeks actually have to get wet with tears. So there's something about that, about how do we navigate ups and downs in life. It's like, you can't do it in theory. You can't talk about it conceptually. You can't write it on a little paper and then put it on the shelf. Like, when it's happening, it's often messy and snotty and just hard. It's hard.
I was listening to some of my yoga and trauma work teachers continuously in this yoga therapist track. So I keep on studying this stuff, and what came up was the healthy trauma cycle, and how our culture does not allow the healing portion from the disappointments or the hardships by design. And that is what allows for the trauma to end up being trauma, because trauma really is, if you look at it at face value, it's just life. Life will create walls and flows at times. And when we hit walls, challenges, hardships, disappointments, if we have the means to come back into relationship, into a community, into the safe hands of our parents, where we can just say what happened, cry it out, and process it out of our system, it's not trauma. It's just some hard thing that happened, and we were able to grow as a result of it. It's part of our evolutionary process, actually. So I love that wisdom Sky, when you say, yeah, it just hit me that I should show up for our session. I should come back into community right in this moment, exactly when it's so hard. I only wish we could provide that. I mean, I feel like we are recreating culture here by what we are doing with each other, and how fortunate it would be if more people got to experience this. And maybe Bonnie's new school can allow this kind of formation to happen for more people, where yeah, I don't know. I don't want to talk more about your school before you do, so I'll shut up. But I would like to add this capacity or this service to humanity into, our services maybe. Yeah, that's what came up for me listening to you all, and the service to the developmental process of a child.
So, when you were first talking, Sky, before we started recording about your experience, I was noticing that the way I respond to these situations is its own signature. And Miriam used the term mad. Maybe I've just haven't really grown out of that stage yet. But I think there's a distinction between mad and angry. Like, being mad is being mad at something you can't change. And to me, I quite often, like, there are things I grieve for, and I'll actually spend time noticing that the grieving wants to happen, and I'll go down the barn and let that wash over me. And it has to do with things like deep laws of the universe, like animals having to suffer, people having to, these things you can't change. But I quickly move from something that starts out sad to anger. Really, and it's not like madness. It's like the anger of action. So when I heard my grandnephew had Burkitt's leukemia, my sister just called me up and she said, I'm just going to say this and we can talk about it later, because she knows me. She said it and I couldn't talk. I was so sad. But there's always in there this seed that's like, I am so freaking angry because I know it's caused by glycophosphate. It's very well researched. This is like, it was on Fox News. I mean, and my mother, for years, I've been telling her, there's a reason why there are like toxic signs on your lawn, Ma, because this stuff is toxic. And he had this tendency when he was very young, he was very shy, when he would put his head down on the floor or on the lawn like that. And it's in his lymph nodes here, and he gets so angry, not at my mom but at how ignorant. And I mean, we're not talking about putting chemicals on industrial farming because you think you're feeding the world. We're talking about putting chemicals on your lawn because of some conditioned aesthetic about suburbia. I mean, it's just crazy, and so like, I just get animated about, it may be the energy why I went further with the school, I was sitting on that, but I just think there's, and I'm not like particularly motivated by the thought or ambition that I think I can change things. I actually don't think so, but the energy is going to come up anyways. And so at least it expresses itself as trying to contribute in the direction of change, right? So, the complexity of things is, I'm not one of these people who get completely self-righteous and spend my whole life now on Burkitt's leukemia. So it's not like that, but Yeah, it was the same way when we bought this house. I'll tell you a pretty personal story. It was a difficult time in our life. We were living in a little tiny house. Um, and we had a lot of costs. We had started a business together, and I had started this other business, and I had horses that I was paying for someone else to take care of. And like all this stuff was really kind of complex, but I knew when the payment for the business was over, because we bought this huge piece of equipment, that if I took the money I was spending on the horses and the money on the business and the money on the little house if I bundled that together, I could finally buy a farm. And so I started looking a year earlier, and long process, maybe 2 years, because I wanted to see properties that I didn't want either. So I could like have this feeling of like, what are the prices, what goes for what are the values, what is the market like? And when I found this house, maybe similar to you, Scott, I was like, that's it. I mean, it was not intellectual. This was just, it just landed. And so this set in motion a series of interesting changes. Number one, we couldn't afford the house. So I asked my mom to live, because, you know, we have the studio, we were going to live in the studio. My mom was going to live in the house. And then she said, yes, she would do it. And then she said, no, she wouldn't do it. And then, so I said to the realtor, well, you know, I'm not going to put in a price because I know you already have the asking price and I don't want to embarrass the owners, and they said, no, they like you, you know, so just put in a bid. So we put in a bid, and then Sandy said, I'll help you buy the house, but I'm not going there with you. So I was going to buy this house without my mother and without my partner. And that's that thing that kicks in. I mean, I was really sad. And I'm like, I'm going to do it anyways. This was a really hard period of my time and Sandy's time. And when we were driving to the realtor to sign the paper, he pulled over and he stopped. And he just said every single thing he never said to me that he hated about me. And I could see from his certain perspective, they were all true, all of them. They're all true. And it cut the barriers between it. And, you know, we ended up buying the house and 30 years later. And so there's something in that. There's something in transforming the energy of disappointment until like you get very, very clear and you become, somebody once said about me, she becomes like an animal. She's so clear on what she wants. And of course that has some negative repercussions for people around me. But that's how I've always kind of experienced. That's a pretty signature way of my being. And I think it's different for different people. So I'm just sharing that.
I have another example of disappointment. I mean, now also many years ago, but as I was training in family constellations and organizational constellations, and our trainer always said, like, the work or the constellation work chooses you. It's not you choosing to do it. And I really felt like, okay, this is my path. And there was an organization who wanted to do more on that, and they invited me to work for them, and I was like, yeah, I see, really great. And then I don't know, a couple of 4 or 5 months in, they said like, no, we stop, it's over. And even said like, oh, we're not going to pay you because you didn't earn any money. And I mean, that was a whole thing in itself. But I was like, okay, this doesn't seem to be the path. And then something else showed up also about constellations in another organization. And I was like, oh, there's the path. So I went there, and then that stopped too. I was like, shit, like, where is the path? Like, every time I engaged fully with it, like, ah, wow, that's how it's going to unfold. And then, nope, that was not how it was going to unfold. And I really, that was a learning about, like, I thought it was that, but the universe somehow is directing me somewhere else. And later on, I could relate better in that way. Like, okay, I might think and visualize, and that's where I want to go, but life has something else in store. And it was actually a very useful lesson for later on, like, not to get attached too much to that specific thing, outcome. And yeah, it's a very delicate dance, and that kind of visualizing and seeing it and wanting it, and then let the universe do its thing. It's like, yeah, that balance is very, very difficult.
I
Yeah.
think
Go ahead.
there's something in the larger disappointment too. You know, you were talking, Bonita, about the this frustrating faith in the processes that are part of building the image that comes with whatever daily life is right now, and has been for the last several hundred years, of producing some sort of societal communication of who we are and how we live together. By that, I'm talking about things like your lawn, or your clothing, or your, you know, your car, or your breakfast, or your job, or your production of identity through how it is formed in the material world, which obviously includes wealth but isn't captured by it. And I guess, I mean, let's just be real. There's really not much that you can look around at in your home, or in your car, or at your phone, or in any part of our lives right now that isn't completely and totally dependent on all the processes of exploitation, extraction, contamination. And it is justified up, down, and sideways by the same justification, Sky, that you were just talking about. Well, these people paid more. Well, I made money off it. Well, that's just how it is. Don't be naive, right? This is how life is. And the reality is, this is how death is. This is how extinction is. This is how you go down. This is not how you honor a relationship. This is not how you build vitalizing processes. This is not how you do this. And it just seems like, particularly this year, we've seen so much failure in this. I mean, at broad scale, billboard level, you know, no, it's not working. You know, the whatever, big pharma sold out the countries that pre-bought vaccines and sold them to the higher bidders. You know, like, everywhere you turn, there's this corruption And the corruption itself is called life. It's called, it's in the justice system. The justice system is created around property, not around life. And so I guess one of the things that I'm sensing right now is a sadness and a disappointment that runs deep, and it runs into some kind of hidden pocket of hope, faith, belief, something that the great they, that the structures, that that democracy will work, that it's possible to have good capitalism, that we can have remember the green economy, that we can do these things. And it's like we can stay addicted to this super addictive, destructive system and just make little alterations and it'll be all right. And that's not all right. It's not what the change is going to look like, feel like. It's dangerous. It's not safe. It's not safe to stay in the game, and it's not safe to get out of the game. And I guess I'm feeling that, in some way, everybody has one of these pockets. No matter really kind of where you are in the spectrum, that there's a way in which there's been some sort of justification of some kind of double bind at some level. You've justified it. And, I see it at the level of, a lot of people who identify themselves on the left of the political spectrum, really believing, oh yeah, we can fix it. But where's the edge of democracy? Like, if you make policies in your own country for, nice environmental change and to support, the economics of your country, but in order to do that, you export all of the slave labor and the contamination and the corruption, you export it to another country. Is that really democracy? Is that really political success? And the answer is no, it's not. But for a long time, it has been like this weird, like there's been a right over the, these are not the droids you're looking for, sort of Jedi mind trick. And it's like the glamour is wearing off of the spell. And for some people, they never had the luxury of living in that spell. The reality they lived in, it never seemed okay because it never was. They were, but for other people, the loss of that illusion is a real loss. And it's a disorienting loss, but it's only an illusion. Whatever that means. So I guess that's something that I'm seeing kind of all over right now too, is people in this kind of, it reminds me of that Monty Python skit, don't mention the war. And that there's this thing and it's right there. And as people are coming out of the pandemic and getting together again and conversations in person are starting again, there's something in the middle of the room there that has to do with yeah, don't mention the war. There's a big problem with the way we've all been living, and we're so wrapped into it from so many different directions. But it's like finding out, your parents stole from you or lied to you, or that some sort of body that was supposed to be just and good is not and never was. That doesn't mean there's not wonderful people in it and that people didn't try. But nevertheless, here we are. So,
There's something you said earlier, Nora, about the liquidifying. Is that a word? That really feels present to me now, hearing you, because I think part of it is like, you know, it's that kind of getting to the bottom of the you have to get right to the bottom to come out the other side. And it feels like right now collectively we could literally be on our knees surrendering to the fact that this is not working, and yet we keep trying to climb back up. You know, getting back to the new normal was almost like, can we just scramble back up the ladder we just sailed down from and somehow patch it together again? And I think there's such a resistance in us, individually and collectively, is to become liquid, like to not know, to literally have what we have held on to and what seemed to be a system that was holding things upright, at least for some of us, to have it disintegrate and not know ahead of time what's on the other side. Like, it's one thing to go, okay, I'm going to disintegrate because I know I'm going to be a butterfly afterwards. Like, I just have to get through this. Like, it's like you do a cleanse in the spring. It's, you know, it's not so fun to do the cleanse, but you know you're going to feel better on the other side. But here I feel like in a way we're in this situation of, you have to take the risk to undo, to unweave, to become liquid without knowing what's on the other side. But the only way you can do that is actually by doing that. And it's probably something that the human ego resists more than anything else, is not knowing, is uncertainty, is becoming liquid. Which I think is why these, you know, in the big picture, smaller disappointments are really good practice. And not to make light of them, because they're very hard when they happen, because becoming liquid is actually not what the human ego wants to do at all. It wants to stay solid. So I know I was just really feeling how both individually and collectively the way through is the through is such an unknown, which I know we've spoken to in other conversations, is we cannot know, we can't kind of like artificially sculpt a future and say, this is it. It's more like becoming as it becomes, by being in a posture of, I don't even know what the words would be, but there's definitely humility in there for me as far as part of the posture.
There's something interesting I'm trying to figure out here, that there's a lot on the table right now, and there's some kind of pattern sensing. Not that I think this is it, but there's something like, so I'm noticing my resistance around the language of, I like the language of liquid. I wrote about like how in the Perspectiva book, I have a chapter that says, you know, as moderns, this just what you said, Miriam, as modern caterpillars, we only want to eat more and, you know, grow more legs. But then we, as modern butterflies, we just want to grow bigger wings and fly faster. And the chrysalis is never invited, hardly ever welcomed, and never invited, right? But so I agree with that part, but there's something in me that is putting up a fight against that. What is needed now is, and I'm not saying you said this, but this sense of like, oh, that's not the path. That's not the path. I need to be more liquid. There's something that I'm resisting in that, because like I just heard on NPR in the car the other day that in the 50s or 60s or 80s, maybe, who knows, time is weird, Congress passed this law to create so that nonprofits could get loans from banks to create affordable housing. So they weren't political affordable housing. And the banks in return would get 15 years of tax write-offs for giving low interest loans to these nonprofits. And then after 15 years, the nonprofits would have the chance to buy their property. And so because of, the economy getting constrained, they found loopholes in it. So those banks sold those loans to financial industries, who are now, because these nonprofits have so well taken care of their low income housing, because they had this ownership, they could be sold for millions and millions of dollars. So they're throwing them out. And this turns out to be legal, although there's a lawsuit because Congress is saying that was not the intent of writing this law. And so it's like, I don't know, is that just the way the world is and we should grieve over that, or should like that piss us off and we should get on to something? And I think maybe one of the distinctions I'm trying to make here, I'm not saying it's actually in your stories, is like, Rita, when you were saying, oh, is that the path? There's a sense that you were relating to it as like, and then I'll be done and I'll have my job. Or Sky is saying, oh, that's the house, and then I'll be done. And I think that's when we get snookered, that we think we go after something as if it fixes everything. And that's when I think we lose those things, because it's not real. Whereas when I was going after this house, it was like, I'd never had that attitude. It was like, it was like more of a crazy, why would I do this? Like, it's just going to mean more. And just like more was being asked of me. So it wasn't like, so I think that there's something in that is making meaning for me. Like, and I've done that. Like, if only I go after something and then I think, then I'm done. And those things never happen because they tend to not be real or something. And so that brings me to this sense of going after something and being completely liquid about it. Just the tide coming in, who can stop the tide? The tide is going to come in.
It reminds me of giving birth to my daughter, and it was a 10 and a half hour birth. It was kind of full on, like it started and it went. But she had a really big head. She was 10 pounds. I'm a pretty small body. And so she got stuck behind my pubic bone, and I ended up pushing for 4 hours. But it was really interesting because I tried all kinds of things, standing, walking, different positions, breathing, whatever. And at one point I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get her out. Like, she's stuck. And so I hit that point of surrender. It's like with the instruments that I have and the faculties that I have, she's not moving. And so I literally kneeled on the ground and got really quiet, and everyone just hushed around me. So it was a midwife, her helper, and my husband. And everyone got really quiet for half an hour. And I literally just prayed. I just got on my knees and prayed. I was like, I got nothing left here. I don't know what to do. And it was one of those moments where at one point in that, I could feel her move. Something happened and she found her way and she moved. And then she was born, and now she's 17. So that's all good. And I was debriefing afterwards with the midwife. And this is the part I actually wanted to get to, because she said she's been a midwife. She comes from a lineage of midwives. She's the kind of midwife who knits in the corner and only kind of pops in as needed, and she's super chill around what she does in the most beautiful way. She said when she's with a birthing woman, she waits until there's something that breaks and the kind of almost like head intellectual way of making something happen disappears. And this is why I was reminded of it, Benita. It's like there's like an animal that comes out. It's like a whole being roar of something moving through the woman's body. And she says, when that happens, she knows the birth is going to happen. And she saw that kick in for me at one point. She's like, okay, this is going to be fine. It might still go through ups and downs and ins and outs, getting stuck or not, but there's that. So I just think it, when we talk about liquidifying, for me, it's not like just surrender, 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 passive, hanging out, waiting for where the path is. It's more undoing some of the more limited ways that we can act and make things happen. And in a way, like it's almost like I have to open up my peripheral vision instead of just having this one. And that's where for me it's such a humbling thing, because I can steer most of my life like this and it sort of works. And then when those moments, those big disappointments happen, it's like that reminder of like, no, actually you need way more faculties than you think. And then there can be a lot of energy and actually a lot of directionality, but it's coming, in my experience, it's coming from a very different place. So I kind of wanted to bring together, there's, yes, the surrender, but that's just a passageway through to potentially very forceful action. Yeah.
I think
Wow.
what you speak about is just one line, like what Nora said, like, is this life, is this life, is this life? No, this is that. But what you're pointing to, I think, is life, that energy that I go with instead of thinking about how I should do it or something. Yeah, I was just making that connection. Go ahead, Sky.
So much here. Ria, what you just said reminded me of something Bonnie said that I've held on to, which is, it was in relation to systems. You said the systems are corrupt, but life finds a way. And, you know, in Miriam, your story, there wasn't corruption there, but I had the same experience giving birth at home also. I think we've had that, the beauty of that, you know, the non-intervention. But, and I had read Ina May Gaskin, the greatest midwife, or one of my heroes, say that there is a moment when the woman has to surrender completely. And I knew that going in, and there was a moment when I just thought, okay, I could die here as long as I get this baby out. And it was real. And that was the moment that the birth turned from days of not moving and stuckness to moving. And so I love this. Like, this is all just sitting here listening to this. I can feel my story about the house and what's happening for me really, really shifting in the beauty of the container and the, you know, this alchemy of the conversation. And then I wonder, I wonder, and maybe it's not even worth wondering, maybe wondering is not concrete, but I'm so future oriented, but I really helps me in my own personal narrative and story to feel a part of the birth of something new in the culture. And that just feels so deep for me. And I do think there's a way we're being challenged or tasked or gifted with finding ways to let life move through us, and like this, you know, deconstructing or within ourselves these systems. And I can't, like, I really get kind of excited about being a part of a culture where people are behaving like that and making decisions like that. And the final, because it's going to look really different, but the final thing I'll say is thank you, Nora, for bringing that fierceness when you brought it with that's not right, that, you know, that's not life. What did she say? It was so good. But whatever it was, I was like, yeah, it also feels so good to have it validated. And I heard you say it too, Miriam, like, they made a mistake and we will not know, but there is something really great. And it was very healing for me in that moment for you to just call out, you know, like, can we just call out the fact, like, fuck the justifying. Like, okay, the offer was a little higher. It was all cash. I wrote a letter about like how, I just poured my heart and soul into this, and maybe someone else did, but I just think they made a mistake, and it wasn't in service of life. And now I'm just gonna be angry like Bonnie for a little while. Resolve is the word that came to me around that anger. Like there's some kind of resolve on the other side. Yeah, it comes out of that anger.
I love that anger. I think that anger is super. It's not anger. It's clarity. I think it's just a strong clarity. And sometimes in this weird culture of really inadequate descriptions of emotional responses, we just describe strong feelings as anger, but they're not. It's not anger. It's more just, oh, that's just not right. And it isn't right. It just isn't right. I'm remembering though, I used to live, Miriam, in Nelson, and I didn't get to know you when I lived there, which is too bad because we were neighbors. But we lived in that house, you may know, that's out at the point of Fisherman Road. And we had left, we had moved to Vancouver, we had left. And Shambhala happened, which is this musical festival. And we got this call from the person who oversaw, we did these like weekend rentals at the house while we weren't there. And she called the police and someone broke into your house and da 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 da. And it was all like, oh no. And then we got this report and it was totally weird. It was like, we came into your house, there were people making dinner in your kitchen. They had folded our laundry that was in the dryer and were doing their laundry. And they were really upset with the police because they were, they started taking the beer and the stuff out of the fridge. They were like, that's our beer. You can't take our beer. And the police were like, well, actually, you broke into a house and we can take your beer. But there was this sort of, just this confusion going on. Okay, so the months roll by and the legal system is, what it is. And we weren't really involved with it at that point. The cops came and they found somebody who had broken into the house, and it was just what it was. They didn't take anything. They were just taking showers and making dinner, and it seemed like a nice place to do that. And so, but as part of their community service, they had to write us this letter. And it was so fantastic. It was this letter that said, well, we were at Shambhala and, it became clear at Shambhala that actually there was no such thing as ownership. And so it seemed like you would be fine with us coming into your house. And it's a beautiful house. And we just thought it would be a beautiful place to make our dinner together. And it seemed like a good idea at the time. And now we understand that maybe we shouldn't have done that. And I mean, isn't that great? It's so funny, right? But what was so great about it was that my husband and I, we're both just a couple of artist hippies, so it's not like we haven't discussed the fallacies of ownership and then there it was in our face of a couple of a bunch of young kids that broke into our house because ownership's not real. And yeah, just there it is. Like are those words you're willing to live by? Like, are we really ready to be in relationship in those sorts of ways? Do we have the slightest idea how weird it's going to be? And did I really mind that those kids came into my house all, high on God knows what and made dinner? Actually, I couldn't care less. the reality is I don't really want them to have a criminal record. I really don't care, you know. And even if they had whatever taken a few things, I don't think that it would be the end of the world for me. Um, but I think it's like we were talking about Esalen, you know, and the weirdness. And this is one of those places where there is no sterility on the other side of the sterility of the justice system. And so if we're trying to flatten that system, systematize it, I think it's going to be trouble. But the other thing is definitely trouble, and it's definitely weird, and it's definitely going to be unusual. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can tie it what I'm about to say to what you just your story, Nora. It's a phenomenal one, and it is definitely one that, you know, makes me ponder like, what would then the alternative world look like, right? All I know is this one is not working. You know, poisoning ourselves, poisoning our children, extracting resources to no end, until, you know, it will be too late, which we're probably already at that point. So bringing back the question of like, how do we do life in the face of this world as it is, with so much, it's not the whole picture. The whole picture is not all the disaster that's happening. There's a lot of goodness also happening, but the disastrous part is definitely also here. And how do I deal with life in the face of all of that? Like raising a child, we would be on my mom's lawn and I would have to fight so that she doesn't put poison on the grass that my child is gonna step on. I would have to fight with her because of this. I would have to make a case for days on how it's just not the best idea. I much prefer the little wiggly worms that are gonna turn into moths than the to poison my child. But then the point I'm trying to bring into this conversation, I think, is like this moment of coming in terms with death, like that moment of turning in birth, which I had a similar experience in my birth, where I realized after 48 hours of trying to home birth, oh, I might die and I'm still at 3 centimeters. I think I'm gonna accept. I'm gonna give up this idea of home birth and I'm gonna go to the hospital now. Try another 24 hours there and end up with a C-section because that's what this life, this moment is calling for. Otherwise, my child or me, we might die. Yeah, I just noticed how I went to Zach Bush's website the other day, and his whole beginning page is about death, like about his reflections on death and dying and kind of normalizing this supposedly or generally philosophically approached topic of death, which is not philosophical at all. It's just in our face at all moments. And yeah, a lot of how I live my life in this world, how do I do life, has to do with finding my way in the most painful moments, finding my way to be okay with death in that moment. You know, death of the idea I was holding, death of what was gonna happen, death of the world I want. You know, even just coming in terms with, yeah, we might we might not make it. The world that I envision might never come true, but I'm gonna die trying. I'm gonna die with that, allowing the anger, allowing that clarity, just to find ways of trying to come through me. Yeah.
I would like to add one thing. What I've recently called for myself, the flip. Like, I work as a therapist, and when clients or myself really, really look the ugliness, the brutality, the injustice, whatever it was, when they really look it in the eye and say, yeah, this is how bad it was in my childhood, whenever I was small. That is a point also where people kind of, as if there is a bigger force that we tap into when we look the reality into the eye, like, this is how bad it was, or this is how bad it is. And then there is some, just like Miriam was saying, like, it's probably that grief cycle, like, okay, my parents really couldn't do any better than what they did, and it was only so much. And then people kind of fall into themselves or into their soul, or I don't know how to call it, but that gives them that strength, and new possibilities open, or new ways of looking. And I think that's also what we need to do on a more collective level. Like, it is that bad, we might not make it, and from there, that flip might happen. Who knows? I don't know, but I've been playing with that idea, like, what is that flip actually? So
I once worked with these people who were interested in, it was fantastic because what they were doing was they were building something like eco communities, but the concept was we need to set up something for the reconstruction, right? The implicit message there is you can't stop the unraveling, it's coming. So what can we do to put something in place for reconstruction? And this is a wonderful mind game, which does not sit nicely in Western culture, by the way. It sits as something hopeless. But it's the hopelessness with so much hope in it for exactly the reasons that you're speaking of. The second you quit trying to stick wings on a caterpillar and let it completely go to liquid, then it can become a caterpillar. But as long as you're trying to, figure out how to adjust the caterpillar so that it's more butterfly-like, the least likely you are to get the butterfly. So they had this concept of basically, what can we put in place for those who will be part of the reconstruction? What will they need? Maybe we'll be there, maybe we won't. And the idea was to create these eco communities that required no employment, no money. So what would it look like to create a community of people who did not in any way need any kind of financial, they didn't need to be employed. They didn't need retirement plans. They didn't need money to pay for daycare. They didn't need to buy diapers. They didn't need to, what will they need? How do we how would you put this together so that there's nothing of the existing system that these people will need, so that there's somebody outside of this disaster? It was a very interesting thought process. So of course, though, what's in that community? Basically, everything that we need to be doing, right? But you're approaching it from a totally different direction, which is not this kind of tapering off of, addictive processes, but actually, the radical change. And I experienced this certainly, in moments of big change in my life, when I, stopped asking, how do I fix the marriage, and thought, how do I do a good divorce? And then the relationship changed completely. And, we're working toward the same outcome, which is essentially that we're able to be human beings in the world and somehow raise our children together and hopefully not die of resentment. But that thing was to switch the direction on it. But it's very uncomfortable in cultures that are pinning everything on this hope. You have to have hope that this is going to be okay, when this is actually not okay. And the hope lies in recognizing that it's not okay. This is going nowhere. So the best thing is that, like you were saying, that switch, Ria, and approaching from a totally different direction.
Yeah, I mean, I love this quote from Thomas Hubel. He says, "What we resist creates tension." And so there's like so much energy in the resistance to what's going on, that when you accept, that's what liberates that energy into free energy. It can then be applied in all these potential directions. Yeah, I'm just humbled. I'm completely humbled just listening to the conversation, remembering birth. One of the more humbling experiences of my life. Talking about death, HA, you brought that up with regard to Zach Bush. And I also just recently read Stephen Herod Buhner's essay, where he beautifully, poetically writes about his own impending death. I mean, he says at one point, I'm dying. I am actively dying. And as a longtime fan of his, that was shocking. I didn't expect that when I started the essay. But he talks about how his dying helps him to be more in contact with the dying of the ecosystems that he's been working with so intimately for his whole career. Very beautiful essay. Yeah, I guess the final thing I'll say, just because it's hard for me not to connect dots. And I think, I don't know, I like these little references. Maybe we have like a little reading list after some of our talks, but there's a children's book called Ember, or The City of Ember. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but you don't know that you're invited into this little world that's all dark. They have light bulbs, but they don't have a sun, and they have greenhouses that they've constructed. Like, you just kind of like get into this world through the two characters, children, and they have jobs, and you just see how this world works. And eventually they find this mystery that it's time to kind of lead the people out of Ember. And what you've come to find out is that this is an underground civilization that was made because the earth was in such distress, but when they emerge, she's regenerated. And it's just so beautiful. I read it with my daughter when she was about 9, and I'm just constantly like, these stories are getting seeded, like that was a very important book for her and for me. And it gives me some hope, that the stories are like, Nora, your story of the community, they're there. Yeah, just humbled.
So I know that we had made a plan to keep this kind of short, and maybe I could just say a little, it's funny, you don't get the last word in. One of the things that occurs to me, this notion of flip, and this children's story is like a flip, right? Like the ending is, perspective gets flipped. I think there's also a sense in which in our common imagination, you know, as things are unraveling or falling apart, the economy is falling apart. I mean, one of the things with coming to terms with just how rotten the state of Denmark is, you know, that's how Hamlet starts. There's something rotten in Denmark. If coming to terms and witnessing just how bad it is has this liberating power in the sense that it's a check against the fact that some people think, okay, well, doing all these, living in this alternative way, that would be nice, but, you know, who wants to sacrifice all that to get there? And the truth is, the flip is, you see that the sacrifice is already too much to stay in this place, you know? And I think that's like, I got a little bit of that from Nora's story. Like, you're not going to suffer people coming into your house and enjoying it. It's not a sacrifice. What's available are tremendous gifts of how to live, right? It's not like, oh, we have to sacrifice this and sacrifice that and sacrifice this and sacrifice that, so the world is sustainable. I believe that life is sustainable by its very nature. And that today we're sacrificing too much. Not everybody is sacrificing too much. How can we turn from like sacrifice to, here, Miriam, sacrament, life as a sacrament?
I was actually told that the word sacrifice comes from sacrificere, or something like that, which means to make sacred. Which is kind of an interesting twist, like that flip, you know? How could you flip it to, because I'm really liking there's so much around, we have to save what is, but what is corrupt. So to actually go, no, life itself is not corrupt, and to follow that thread, which we don't know then, you know, I doubt it will be that there is no ownership at all, but there might not be. But I think there will be responsibility in stewarding, and there will, you know, it doesn't just all become this one big mush. My hunch is that we include some clarity and lines and agreements, but it's not at the it's not with this priority that ultimately always money wins and greed always finds its way. Like, that's the piece I think needs to topple. There's a lot that we have here that can be included. There's a lot of wisdom and insight that we have accumulated as a humanity. I just think it's this thing that always the making profit is always the end thing that needs to happen. That's what's so rotten about, you know, I don't want to name Denmark, the whole world at this point. It's, yeah.
I have to just add this just to keep the whole thing, just a part of the story. I just got a text from the realtor that it's supposed to make me feel better, but the reason it went to somebody else is because they bid $50,000 more. So money. But you know, that's just, I just wanted to add that. It's like, oh my God.
And I have a story, Sky, which was very similar. And people were devastated. And like, this was our house. And they were like, ah. And so, no, it wasn't happening. And a year later, they got a phone call. And I don't remember all the details, but it was very complex and complicated. And the so-called buyers in the end didn't buy it, and they came back to the people told like, that was our house, yeah, who knows?
Now we're back to hope.
I mean, I just have to say, for the record, I have never experienced a rejection in my life that I wasn't later grateful for. And at the time, they were all devastating. But had those rejections not taken place, other things couldn't have happened that were actually much better. So, not to try to be a Pollyanna, I know it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but you know, it's the truth. It's like, and this is why I hate that future visioning thing, because we can't, those things are never in the future vision, right? We're going to have this vision and we're going to cast this beautiful vision of the future, and it's not going to include any of the devastating parts where our vision sucked and some other thing came along that was much more on. And yeah, anyway, you just, yeah, $50,000.
What you're saying, Nora, doesn't that also loop back into what you're saying, Bonnie, about life is intelligent and life, the flow, if we dare to accept it at some level, works out a certain way. If that's the mindset that jumps from we have to manipulate, extract, control, that leaps into we listen, observe, and act as part of. And just to give a very practical example, I am trying to work with Airbnb, trying to find our next rental house here. And it's so crazy. Airbnb will not allow me to talk to the owners of the houses directly. So they keep on blocking numbers, blocking social media names, blocking maps. How different the future of Airbnb could be if they could see this as a need that they can serve. It's feedback, it's information that's reflecting back at them. This is a need of mine. How about you add another service that allows me to do this interaction, you know, instead of like trying to resist me and fight me because you think you're gonna make more money through your existing platform, your existing structure.
Yep. It was great, ladies. It's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so opening a seed to a new conversation around maybe action logics, action logics in a new direction. That, I mean, we don't know what we'll talk about next time, but we ended up with like a teaser into a whole nother conversation. So, so thank you all, and be well.
Be well.
Be well.